All right, John, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Good morning or afternoon, depending where you are. This is John Dwyer. I am the president of the Global Alzheimer's Platform. We are an organization that is a not-for-profit dedicated to the proposition of reducing the time, reducing the cost, and improving the quality of Alzheimer's clinical trials. We have been active in this field for over 6 years and been involved in nearly all of the clinical trials that have led to the drugs that are being evaluated by the FDA, as well as ADUHELM, which is now the subject of CMS's discussions since we started. Just a word about myself. It's important to have context. I am a serial healthcare entrepreneur, but more importantly, a guy who comes from a family that has been pillaged by Alzheimer's. My grandmother died of Alzheimer's. My father died of Alzheimer's. 6 of his 12 siblings died of Alzheimer's. So my involvement is, like many of my colleagues in the patient advocacy arena, is we're in it to win it, agnostic to who brings the first therapy to market, but eager for a drug to help battle this pernicious, progressive, and always fatal disease. I thought I'd just quickly give our colleagues on this call an overview of our point of view, preliminary point of view on the NCD issued by the draft NCD issued by CMS. It is very problematic, to be honest. The approach they've taken is unprecedented and discriminatory in our judgment towards Alzheimer's patients, and the reasons for it don't merit the solution. This is a case where the cure could be substantially worse than the problem that's trying to be resolved. Specifically, the fact that CMS has decided to revert to randomized clinical trials, something we know a lot about in Alzheimer's, as the means by which they are going to get comfortable in gathering evidence adequate to determine the drug's efficacy, clinical benefit relative to the safety risk, is unprecedented. Ask CMS when they've done this before. It's not been done. Moreover, some of the elements of the solution proposed actually do not achieve the result they're trying to achieve. We'll come back to that in a second. I want to make clear at the outset that we've waited 20 years for a drug to mitigate the decline associated with mild cognitive impairment or mild Alzheimer's disease. We finally got one through the FDA under the accelerated approval process, and a process that specifically is designed to take advantage of the fact that there are diseases out there that are orphaned in the sense that there's no therapy approved for their treatment. And in this case, we have hundreds of thousands of people in this country that are Medicare beneficiaries with MCI, and they have no approved treatment. Let's understand context here. This isn't a case where this is the 3rd or 4th or 5th therapy that might stack on top of a set of therapies already available. It's a progressive disease that then turns into mild AD, moderate AD, severe AD, and then death. And it's not a pretty process. So CMS has raised some important questions, many of which we applaud. We certainly agree with and have openly said that randomized clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease need to reflect the population that is afflicted with the disease. We need more people from the African American community in randomized clinical trials. We need more people from the Latino community in randomized clinical trials because they are twice as or 1.5 times more likely to get the disease than folks of white European heritage. So we applaud the point the CMS made made to have more folks involved in trials. But does this proposal achieve that result? Just so the folks listening understand, GAP is put its money where its mouth is in respect of diverse clinical trials. We are finishing a Alzheimer's biomarker study where we publicly said we would do a minimum of 20% African American or Latino participants in the study. The study is well over halfway randomized, enrolled in this case, and we are at 19.7% African American Latinos, and our goal is 20. We will exceed 20% in our study. So not only do we know how to do it, we know how hard it is, and we are deeply committed to it. The proposal from CMS, though, is to replicate the studies that have already been done, and in one case, the recipient of accelerated approval by CMS. To do that is to accentuate delay, accentuate the possibility of discordance standards for approving a drug, and this NCD covers a class of drugs. It doesn't just cover Biogen's drugs. And what causes all of us patient advocates enormous concern is the discriminatory nature of this decision or proposed decision, which across 4 fronts needs to be addressed. Number one, this is the first time CMS has responded to an accelerated approval from the FDA and not given a clean NCD for label. And we have to ask why that is. When cancer drugs receive that treatment, when HIV drugs receive that treatment, with their own unique benefit and risks, we are doing that detailed forensic analysis now, but the early readout is there are plenty of drugs with uncertain benefits and less than perfect safety profiles that CMS treated very differently than they are treating this drug. Second, this drug is for a disease that has no treatment. And historically, both the FDA and CMS has been much more broad-minded about how it would approach a untreated disease. Third, the point around making sure we have diversity in the data, I've already applauded, but why now? Why us? Why bring this as a point to generate a subsequent approval by CMS and selecting only hospitals to do it in combination is going to cause these studies to take quite a long time. It'll take, in our judgment, 2 years to stand up a study that CMS wants in the proposed language, and 2 to 3 years to enroll it, 1 year to 2 years to evaluate the drug. And so that's 4 + 2, 6 to 7 years incremental delay for the hundreds of thousands of patients that could benefit from a drug in getting the drug to market. Now, CMS is a wonderful organization. We support it. We just want them to give us coverage so we can let doctors and families consult with each other and decide whether this drug works for them. But if they're really going to get in the randomized clinical trial business, they have to greatly up their game. They need internal resources they don't have. They need disciplines, AKA neurologists, they don't have. And they need to understand the science of Alzheimer's clinical trials. That is not trivial. Alzheimer's clinical trials traditionally have run in a very unhappy top 3 to 5 set of categories of longest in duration, highest in cost, highest failure rate, really significant failure rate. So we finally got one in 20 years, and then they want to repeat all the results. and they only want to do it with hospitals. And while I love our hospital partners and they do great work, they're slow and they're very challenged right now by COVID. It might interest all of you to know that 60 to 80% of all randomizations in Alzheimer's clinical trials are done in non-hospital settings. And the CMS has created a suggested model that can only extend the time to get to an answer they want. Why is that? The safety profile on ADUHELM, which we do not endorse or disparage, the facts are that it is a severe adverse event rate of 0.3%. Even one significant severe adverse event is too much. It needs to be carefully thought through, but this is not a drug that, when compared to the vast number of drugs CMS has given a coverage to, this is not a drug that stands out for a lack of safety for patients. And we fully agree that rigorous and closely watched process needs to be implemented as part of this NCD to allow for patients to safely get on the drug in consultation with their doctor. So the last point I'll make is, when you look at the body of evidence, the lack of precedent, a lack of sensitivity to the time that's going to be lost with the proposal that CMS has advanced, and the tiny number of folks that are going to be able to get on drug, whether they're African American, Latino, or Caucasian. We're only talking about thousands of people here, because randomized clinical trials to get the evidence that CMS wants will only require thousands of people at most, when hundreds of thousands of people might benefit. We have clinical trials coming in from FDA regulated trials, in addition to the data CMS already has, that can inform CMS much more quickly than their own process can. There is the follow-on confirmatory study that Biogen has proposed. There is a head-to-head study that's public between Lilly's drug and Biogen's drug, which is also being rigorously and carefully brought forward to the market. And CMS should take those data into account and get comfortable, create a structure that allows them to inform their continued coverage of the drug, but use soon to be available data. And not, by the way, the fourth and last, but very vitally important discriminatory element of this process is unprecedented. I am a lawyer by training, that CMS would create a model for a class of drugs, the other 3 or 4 of which that haven't even come to them yet. They haven't even seen the safety and efficacy data on these drugs. They've created a solution that says, well, you can have the privilege of going through yet another trial, spending hundreds of millions of dollars to satisfy us after you satisfy the FDA, and done so without giving them due process, fundamental fairness of knowing what their efficacy and safety profiles are. And I assure you, these drugs have been rigorously studied, and the trials they're in are rigorously undertaken. We'll see where the data comes out. But from my mind, and my colleagues agree, this is because there's too many of us, that the CMS is slowing us down to a mere trickle of coverage because they don't want to pay for covering for us. And we agree the price needs to be a subject of great review. We agree there should be price competition on drugs that come forward. We've already seen Biogen have the price of the drug, but I want the folks on this call to know that we have never seen a whole class of drugs put through a gauntlet that's being proposed the way it's being proposed by CMS after their sister agency, better candidly suited to evaluate the science, has approved these drugs per a statute designed for this fact pattern. So we are happy to entertain any questions, but want people to recognize this is going to be a very slow process, far slower than CMS let on. not get the unrepresented populations into the study, because hospitals are generally not located where unrepresented populations live, the kind of hospitals they're talking about, the great research centers. And so we think this is flawed for at least 4 good reasons and should be reversed in its entirety and returned to an NCD with certain preconditions to getting on drug that will sustain the accuracy of the diagnosis, prevent misuse or misallocation of resources, and give patients that can benefit a chance to get benefit from this and this whole class of drugs. So with that, I will gladly take questions.
If you have any questions, you can either put them in the Q&A box, or you can also raise your hand and I can unmute you so you can talk. Thanks. Great. Seeing none, thank you everyone for your time today.
Thank you, everybody. Ask CMS some of the questions I've raised, please. Bob Herman has a question. Go ahead,
Yep.
Bob.
Bob, I'm going to unmute you now. Bob, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Thanks for taking this. I have a question. You said that this NCD, disproportionately will hurt, people, who are Black or Hispanic, considering the disease affects those populations more. But Biogen's own phase 3 studies barely included any of this population. So isn't it paramount to have another clinical study that actually represents these very people that you say will be hurt by this NCD?
So, Bob, I agree with you that subsequent confirmatory studies, whether it's Biogen's, Lilly's, Roche's, or Eisai's, and studies from here on out need to be more aggressive in their enrollment of folks from underrepresented populations. And without breaking any confidences, I can tell you that is happening. But the problem with the NCD as written is they're not going to give access or easy access to Latino and African-American communities, because most, not all, Bob, but most of the hospitals they presume to use in their model are not located in nearby communities of color. Moreover, they have historically not been great at recruiting from those communities. The same, I think it was 6% in Engage and Emerge, around 6 to 8, Engage and Emerge Biogen study. Those are the hospitals that did Engage and Emerge. And so the fact that the randomized clinical trial design proposed by CMS won't do what we have done, which is go to the communities and allow us to conduct a RCT in communities that will get that result and get those numbers up, is intrinsically denying access to the randomized clinical trials CMS is proposing, Bob. And that's what we find regrettable.
But isn't it, I just wonder, isn't it more regrettable that Biogen just didn't do this from the start? Because why weren't their phase 3 trials inclusive? I mean, as you say, everyone knows that the populations that you mentioned are more affected. Why didn't the phase 3 trials, when they were enrolling, include more of these populations? It seems like this is a problem that is from years ago, not just all of a sudden now.
You're right. And it's endemic.
So it sounds like the frustration should be with Biogen for not doing the right studies then.
Well, the frustration should be, I think I take a slightly maybe more benevolent point of view, but I take the point of view that Biogen's results are consistent with every drug company's results in every, and NIA studies as well, of all stripes. Nobody was doing enough to get folks from the Latino and African American community. My study did. We're going to finish at about 22%. But does that mean we've never declined coverage for a drug for lack of diversity in the clinical trials up to now? Why all of a sudden does Biogen and Alzheimer's patients suffer this policy change without notice and comment and thoughtful discussion about what the unintended consequences of denying the drug because of their historical enrollment? This is true of cardiology, diabetes, not so much, but there's every indication it has this deficiency. We don't countenance it. We have addressed it in our own organization. And I can tell you, Bob, future trials will do better. But to say that thousands of patients should be denied the drug because Biogen did no better than all the other drugs before it seems to me to be a little bit out of balance. There's another question, Pete, I thought.
Great. Simon, I'm going to unmute you now. Bob, thanks for your questions. Simon, go ahead.
Hey, John. Thanks for the talk. I'm just wondering about the comparison to the other medications with the CMS. So ADUHELM didn't show incredible efficacy in the clinical trials, and it faced pushback from a lot of the advisory panels and committees, as well as the EMA and regulatory committees in Japan. I understand there's a bit of confusion with the CMS trying to do the FDA's job, but I'm just wondering how you reconcile the position of wanting to provide access for the drug when the evidence for efficacy is so controversial.
So it's equivocal, no doubt. I wish it was better. That's the whole purpose. And what's so disheartening about CMS's position here, that was the whole purpose of the accelerated approval statute, which, by the way, is actually written to give the Secretary of Health and Human Services the authority, and he's rolled it down to the FDA to approve a drug subject to a confirmatory trial if they see a biomarker has been modulated enough to make it reasonably likely that this drug will provide clinical benefit. I'm paraphrasing the statute. And that authority rests with the FDA, not CMS, just so we're clear. I deeply respect, there are many of the detractors of the data for ADUHELM are, Simon, friends of mine. And, but at the end of the day, FDA approved the drug subject to a confirmatory study. And there are really great doctors who I respect and trust that are prescribing the drug. And I believe are doing it because they believe it will help patients, and they're doing it safely. Steve Salloway at Brown is the poster child for that point of view. And so my point of view, Simon, is I didn't go to medical school, much to the distress of my mother. But I know that if I had someone I cared about, I'd take him to Steve Salloway and determine whether the drug was good for them. And I think that after you have an accelerated approval, that is precisely why that statute exists, so that patients and doctors can evaluate on a per patient basis whether the therapy works for them or not, and then get the next confirmatory study done with diversity as fast as possible. And there are people that are pro this drug. There are people that are con this drug. I'm agnostic. I just want the opportunity to have access to it for all communities and let their physician and the families figure this out safely. And Medicare needs to do more in that regard. Improve the assessment during the annual visit, add more diagnostics to the coverage so that we know people are appropriate for a drug, whether it's this one, Simon, or in the class that's coming. Because this the problem with this, Simon, is this discussion is not just about Biogen. You're tainting Lilly's drug, Eisai's drug, Roche's drug, and other drugs that are coming off of ADUHELM's equivocal data. That's not appropriate. And CNS is putting them all into a straitjacket without due process, without a fair review. And ADUHELM did get an FDA accelerated approval. I want patients to have choice. I want more drugs, and I don't want a 6-year waiting period for a trial that is, frankly, in my judgment, Medicare is currently organized as ill-equipped to observe and monitor and judge. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, thanks for that. There's a lot of regulatory drama going on right now between CMS, FDA, Biogen, and it seems like the patients are caught in the middle of it.
That's very true. And all we're doing is progressing and dying in the disease while this goes on. I would, since it's my presser, I would humbly ask, but I mean it from the bottom of my heart, I wish Secretary Becerra and the President of the United States would get its two agencies in harmony rather than put us in this kind of whipsaw. And this is exactly what we're going to get. We're going to get drug companies, therapies that get whipsawed between what FDA thought was good enough and potentially what CMS thinks is good enough. That is not fair to Alzheimer's patients.
Great. Thank you for your question, Simon. Do we have any other questions? Great. Seeing none, thanks so much, everyone, for your time today.
Thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank you,
good
John.
day.